not spoken publicly for the better part of the last 2 years. And it's not because we haven't had anything to say,
Right.
because Lord knows we have. There have been so many painful things that have been.
For almost 2 years, Justin Baldoni watched the world tell his story for him. While speculation spread across social media and headlines fueled endless debate, he refused to respond. His silence became one of Hollywood's biggest mysteries. Then everything changed. Justin Baldoni finally turned on his camera, looked straight into the lens, revealing his perspective on the controversy, and said the thing so many of us had quietly suspected about Blake Lively. The night he finally spoke. There is one thing about that video you need to know before we get into a single word of it. Justin Baldoni is a director. He has spent his whole career deciding when a camera turns on, where it sits, and what a person says when it does. So when he chose one quiet evening to post a video to Instagram, filmed on a phone from the home he and his wife moved to just outside Nashville, none of it was an accident. He had not spoken in public for the better part of 2 years, and the last thing he had posted was a simple tribute to his wife, Emily. Then, out of nowhere, he sat her down beside him and started talking to all of us. The words themselves were soft. He talked about gratitude, and he said it more than once, like a man who had been rehearsing the feeling until it finally became true. He talked about healing, and about how healing never moves in a straight line, and about how the only things that still felt real to him were his kids, his family, his friends, and his faith. If you only listened to the tone, you would swear you were watching a man make peace with something and quietly walk away from it. That is exactly what he wanted you to believe you were watching. But then Emily spoke, and the temperature of the whole thing changed in a second. She said that all of this gratitude did not erase the injustice and the pain they had felt, and then she said the line that everyone would be repeating by morning. She asked how something like this could even happen. And then she added 5 words that landed like a slap, let alone disguised as a fight for women. When Justin mentioned the painful things that had been spoken into existence over the last couple of years, Emily leaned in and finished his sentence with one cold word: untruthful. Now look closely at what actually happened there, because this is the part almost everybody rushed straight past. In nearly 5 full minutes of talking about the most public accusation of his entire life, Justin Baldoni never once said the name Blake Lively. Not a single time. And that is not a man who forgot her name. That is a man who knows precisely what a name does inside a story, and who chose to leave a Blake-shaped hole right in the middle of the frame so that you would fill it in yourself. He let you do the accusing for him. That is the admission hiding underneath all of the calm. He was not confessing to anything he did. He was finally admitting what he had believed the whole time, that in his mind the harassment case was never really about safety at all, that it wore the language of protecting women like a costume. His supporters had been screaming that exact theory into the void for 2 years straight. On this night, in his own living room, he finally said it out loud with a straight face and a soft voice. And the moment he did, the story stopped being about what happened on a movie set and became about something far more dangerous to the other side. It became about a number that nobody could explain, a settlement figure that made no sense at all to anyone who was keeping score. What $0 really means. For a 4-minute video to rattle this many powerful people, something enormous had to have happened right before it. So let us rewind about 9 weeks, to the moment the whole legal war quietly ended. The two sides settled roughly 2 weeks before they were supposed to walk into a courtroom for trial. And here is the detail that broke everyone's brains when it came out. No money changed hands. Not one single dollar. Blake Lively had come into this fight with a reported demand in the hundreds of millions, and she walked away from that table with nothing paid to her at all. Both camps immediately stood up and declared total victory, which is exactly how you know the truth is messier than either of them wants it to be. Let me give you the honest scoreboard, because both sides are counting on you not to look too closely. On paper, the numbers lean Justin's way, and it is not close. His side had already survived the worst of it. A judge named Lewis Lyman had thrown out 10 of Blake's 13 claims earlier in the year, including every single one of her sexual harassment claims. His lawyer, Ellen Garofalo, made a point of reminding everyone that Blake settled without Justin or his studio paying a cent of the $300 million she was demanding. His other attorney, Brian Friedman, put it even more bluntly when he asked the obvious question, which was, if her case was so strong, why on earth settle it for no money at all? When that judge tossed out Blake's harassment claims
for actress Blake Lively about her co-star Justin Baldoni, who she's accusing of sexual harassment. An over-the-top proposal video Baldoni made that went viral more than a decade ago has resurfaced.
He did not rule that nothing happened to her on that set. He ruled on something much drier and more technical than that. He decided she could not bring those specific claims because of where the film was shot and because of how she was legally classified on the production. He even wrote that an actor performing inside a scene has to be given some room to work within an agreed script. That is a ruling about law and jurisdiction. It is not a stamp that says the accusations were false. Anyone telling you the court declared Justin innocent is selling you something, and the same goes for anyone telling you the court declared him guilty. Blake's team understands every bit of this, which is precisely why they refused to concede a single inch. They called the outcome a resounding victory for her, and they pointed straight at the one sentence in the joint statement where his side acknowledged that her concerns deserved to be heard. So you had two teams, one courthouse, one settlement worth absolutely nothing, and two completely opposite stories walking out the front doors at the same time. A branding expert named Aaron Evans said the thing out loud that a lot of people in that world were only thinking. He pointed out that nobody ever releases a settlement document that makes them look bad. And then he said that both sides were now fighting two separate cases at once, the one in the court and the one online. And Blake understood that online wore better than anyone alive. Because just hours after settling a case worth $0, she showed up at the Met Gala in a vintage gown and turned the entire evening into a victory lap in front of the whole planet. It was a flex, and it was a very smart one. But while everybody was busy watching her float down that carpet, almost nobody noticed the single most important thing about the deal she had just signed, which was not a clause that made it into the paperwork at all. It was a clause that had been left out of it on purpose. The story he is free to tell. In almost every settlement of this size, there is one weapon both sides insist on before anyone signs a thing. It is called a non-disclosure agreement, and it works like a muzzle that gets strapped onto everybody in the room. You cannot talk about the case. You cannot say anything negative about the other side. You take the deal, and in exchange, you take the silence along with it, usually forever. That is the normal price of ending a war like this one, and that is the exact price Justin Baldoni flatly refused to pay. His own lawyer confirmed it on a podcast not long after the ink dried, and once you hear it, that July video snaps completely into focus. Brian Friedman explained that most deals like this come loaded with broad confidentiality, the kind where you cannot breathe a single bad word about anyone involved. But he said that, for his client, the most important thing in the entire negotiation was, in his own words, being able to speak his truth and being able to tell the story. So Justin gave up money he could have chased, and in return, he kept the one thing that money cannot buy back once you have signed it away. He kept his voice. So when Emily looked into that camera and said there was so much more to say, and Justin promised that the time to say it would come, that was not some vague emotional tease. That was a hard legal fact wearing an emotional face. There is no gag order. There is no muzzle on him. He is free to name every name, tell every version of every meeting, and open every door he wants to open, whenever he alone decides the moment is right. And according to reporting from the tabloids, he is already being circled by people desperate to pay for exactly that. One source claimed it is hard to imagine him getting any less than $10 million just for his story, and that a full docuseries would pay even higher, with a bidding war being all but guaranteed. We all pressed play expecting one of two things, either an apology or a breakdown. We wanted the man to either fall to his knees or lose his composure, because that is what we have been trained to expect from people who stand where he is standing. Instead, we got something none of us were ready for. We got a filmmaker, calm and composed, quietly pulling open a door that he now controls completely. He even ended the video by casually noting its exact runtime down to the second, which is not the kind of thing a broken man does. It is the kind of thing a producer does. That is the reframe that changes everything about this story. That video was never a confession at all. It was a trailer. It was the cold open to a much longer project, and he was showing us just enough to guarantee that every one of us would be there when the real thing finally drops. And the reason that idea terrifies one side of this and thrills the other comes down to a single uncomfortable truth about who Justin Baldoni was before any of this ever began. Because the man now threatening to tell everything was, for years, the very last man in Hollywood that anyone expected to see standing in the villain's spot. The man the whole world trusted. To feel the full weight of this scandal, you have to know the exact reputation it flattened. Justin Baldoni did not build his name playing tough guys or bad boys. He built it as a sensitive one. He was the man who stood on a stage at a major conference and gave a whole talk about how exhausting he found it to keep trying to be, in his own words, man enough. He wrote a book about it. He hosted a podcast about it. He took the entire idea of the emotionally available, self-aware male ally and turned it into a personal brand, and a very profitable one at that. To millions of people, he was the safe one, the good guy, the actor from Jane the Virgin who actually seemed to mean all the gentle things that other men only said for applause. He collected an award from a respected women's advocacy organization for exactly this kind of work. He positioned himself as living proof that a man in Hollywood could be powerful and kind at the very same time. That is the pedestal he built with his own two hands, one brick at a time, over more than a decade of careful work. And that is precisely why the fall was so brutal to watch. There is a very specific kind of betrayal that only works when the person who wore the white hat first. We are strangely forgiving of people who always looked like villains, because they never once asked us to trust them in the first place. But when the man who sold himself as the protector gets accused of being the opposite of that, something short-circuits inside the audience. The anger is not only about the accusation itself, it is about the sick feeling of having been personally fooled. If you have ever trusted someone all the way, and then watched that trust turn to ash in your hands, you already know the exact heat of that feeling. And now you can multiply it by a few million people who all felt it in the same week. Blake's legal team understood that weapon perfectly, and they aimed it straight at the center of his chest. They built a huge part of their public argument around the idea that he was now contradicting years of his own carefully crafted image. The entire point was to make the gap between the brand and the accusation feel as wide and as sickening as they possibly could. And for a while there, it worked flawlessly. It worked so well that his consequences did not arrive over the course of weeks or months. They arrived in the space of about a day. Within roughly 24 hours of the story going public, his powerful talent agency dropped him cold. The advocacy group that had just honored him quietly pulled its award back. His podcast co-host walked away from him. The safe man, the good guy, the ally, went from beloved to radioactive so fast that the sheer speed of it became its own headline. An entire reputation that had taken more than 10 years to build came apart before most people had even finished reading the article. And that article, the one that lit the whole match, came down to a single set of private text messages and one short phrase buried inside them that would soon become the ugly slogan for this entire scandal. What really happened on that set? Long before any of this ever reached a courtroom, the trouble started in the one place cameras are supposed to make magic, right there on the set of the film itself. By the time the movie came out in the summer of 2024, the whispers were already impossible to ignore. The two stars were not promoting it together. They were never once photographed side by side. Blake was out doing her own press. Justin was off doing his. And the distance between them was so obvious that fans started building entire theories out of a red carpet neither of them would share. Then, in December of 2024, the whispers turned into a formal complaint. Blake filed paperwork accusing Justin and his team of a hostile environment and, far more explosively, of running a coordinated campaign to trash her reputation the moment she started raising concerns. One single day later, a major newspaper published a deep investigation into those exact claims, and the headline pulled 4 words straight out of the leaked messages: "We can bury anyone." And that phrase instantly became the flag the entire scandal would march under. The messages sitting at the heart of that story are what turned a set dispute into a national obsession. They were traded among Justin's crisis team, which included a publicist who had famously worked to defend Johnny Depp during his own courtroom war with Amber Heard. In those texts, people on his side talked about wanting Blake to feel like she could be buried, and about wanting things to stay, in one genuinely chilling word, untraceable. Someone even wrote that they could not put in writing that they would destroy her, which is the kind of sentence that somehow manages to say the quiet part and hide it at the very same time. The messages leaked out through a former publicist who had them sitting on a work phone, and once they were public, there was no unseeing them. Justin's side has always sworn up and down that those texts were ripped clean out of context and stitched together to look far worse than they truly were. He argued that the reporters cherry-picked the ugliest fragments and ignored everything around them, and he even claimed the newspaper had a copy of Blake's complaint in hand before it published a single word. Maybe there is something real to that, but context is a very hard sell when the raw phrases themselves are that cold. And in those first brutal days, almost nobody was in any mood to hand him the benefit of the doubt. The people who actually knew Blake certainly were not. The author of the original book, Colleen Hoover, publicly backed her and told her to never wilt. Co-stars stepped forward one by one to defend her. For one heavy moment, the entire creative family behind that film lined up on a single side of the fight, and Justin was left standing completely alone on the other. It got so heavy that Hoover would later admit she could barely stand to talk about her own book anymore, confessing that she was almost embarrassed to say she had even written it. But Justin Baldoni was never the type of man to simply absorb the hits and disappear into the quiet. He was about to swing back with a number so enormous that it made its own headlines, and he was about to drag 2 of the most powerful people on the entire planet into the ring with him. The war that played out in court. If Blake fired the first shot, Justin answered her with a cannon. He launched a countersuit seeking $400 million. And he did not just aim it at Blake alone. He named her husband, the actor Ryan Reynolds, and one of the most powerful publicists in the entire business, right alongside her. Then he opened up a second front entirely, hitting the newspaper that ran the original story with a separate libel claim worth another $250 million. He was not playing defense anymore. He was trying to flip the whole story on its head and recast himself as the real target of a coordinated takedown. The Ryan Reynolds piece of this is where the whole thing got almost surreal. Justin's team argued that Reynolds had mocked him on the big screen, claiming that a smug, hollow character in a giant superhero movie was secretly a caricature of Justin himself, a direct jab at the very ally image he had spent years building. Reynolds and his lawyers swung back hard, and one of their lines cut straight down to the bone. They said Justin was really just trying to shame Reynolds for being the actual man that Justin had built his whole brand pretending to be. That is the kind of sentence that leaves a mark on a person. And then the whole thing pulled in Taylor Swift, because of course, it eventually did. Justin's team fired a subpoena in Swift's direction, apparently believing she had been used as leverage during a tense fight over the script. Her representatives shut it down fast, insisting she had never even set foot on the set, and that her only connection to the film was licensing one of her songs. The subpoena got pulled back, but later, when a batch of private messages was unsealed, the world got a peek behind the celebrity curtain that nobody has forgotten since. There were texts where Blake seemed to call Justin a clown and a doofus director, and where she referred to her powerful friends as her dragons who protect the people she fights for. Swift for her part, had reportedly written something about a tiny violin. It was petty, it was human, and it was exactly the kind of thing that makes a story completely impossible to look away from. But here comes the twist that neither side saw clearly enough coming. The judge started quietly dismantling everything in sight. In the middle of 2025, that same judge threw out Justin's giant countersuit and his newspaper lawsuit on the very same day. Justin was handed a narrow window to fix and refile parts of it, and for reasons only his own team fully understands, that window slid shut in the fall with no action taken, which made the dismissal final. Then, months later, in the spring of this year, the judge turned right around and gutted most of Blake's case, too. When the smoke finally cleared out, nearly everyone had lost the biggest piece of what they came in swinging for. That is the part that makes this whole story so maddening and so magnetic at once. There was no clean hero and no clean villain walking back out of that courthouse. One of Blake's own lawyers, Michael Gottlieb, argued that public opinion had actually been on her side at the very start, and that it only turned after Justin's camp went on the offensive and branded her a liar all over the press. Both sides had bled out. Both sides had lost something huge. And when the lawyers finally packed up their boxes and went home for good, the people left standing in the wreckage were not the ones anyone would ever have predicted, and one friendship that used to own every red carpet in America was already stone-cold dead. The people still standing in the wreckage. Let's talk about the woman whose name Justin refused to say, because her silence in all of this is somehow louder than any statement she could ever release. Since the settlement, Blake Lively has gone quiet in a very deliberate and controlled way. According to reporting from one entertainment insider, she watched every single second of Justin's video, and she was absolutely furious by the end of it. The read on her side is that Justin is trying to rewrite the entire history of this and recast himself as the wronged party. But she is reportedly refusing to take the bait, because she has zero interest in handing this story another news cycle to feed on. In a detail that feels almost too perfect to be real, she was photographed having a relaxed lunch with Ryan Reynolds in Canada just hours before Justin's video ever went live. Reynolds, for what it is worth, is said to be quietly enraged by the whole thing. Then there is the friendship that died in the rubble without a sound. For years, Blake and Taylor Swift were the very definition of a Hollywood power friendship. So close that Swift is godmother to Blake's own children. That bond did not survive this.
Here's the good news. Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift can now ask each other who's going to take out the trash. Well, because they got married over the weekend.
When Swift got married over the summer to the football star Travis Kelce, Blake was reportedly not on the guest list at all. Instead of celebrating with the friends she once treated like family, Blake spent that same weekend at a horse show with her own daughter. A source close to the situation put it about as plainly as a person can, saying that as far as Swift is concerned, that friendship is simply finished. 2 years ago, that sentence would have been unthinkable to anyone. Today, it is just one more casualty in a very long list. And do not you dare overlook Emily Baldoni, because her role in that video was the most quietly strategic part of the entire performance. For 2 full years, she had stayed almost completely out of the public conversation, standing behind her husband while the whole world argued about him. Then she stepped forward and delivered the single sharpest lines in the entire video. It was Emily, not Justin, who said the accusations were disguised as a fight for women. It was Emily who cut in with that one flat word, untruthful, putting the wife right at the front and center. Letting her be the one to throw the hardest punches was a deliberate choice, and a shrewd one, because it is a great deal harder to paint a man as a monster when his own partner is sitting right there swinging on his behalf. But before anybody rushes to crown Justin the clean winner of all this, there is one number still hanging over his head like a low storm cloud. Even after everything, the court ruled that his side has to pay Blake's legal fees, and her team has already filed to collect a little over $8 million, plus a whole pile of additional costs stacked on top of that. The judge did decline to hit him with extra punishment money, finding there was not enough proof that his side had acted with real malice. So even the version of this story where Justin walks away victorious comes with an $8 million asterisk stapled to the bottom of it. Nobody in this thing got out clean, and nobody got out cheap. So here is what he actually admitted on that ordinary night with the phone camera rolling in his hands. He did not admit to any wrongdoing, and he never will on those terms, not to any of us. What he admitted, quietly and completely, is that he was never truly silenced at all. He was simply waiting the whole time. He kept his voice on purpose. He kept his story on purpose. And he made sure that when the muzzle finally came off, he would be the only one left holding the pen. The war that everyone assumed had ended did not actually end. It just got handed to him, privately, to sell on his own schedule whenever he pleases. And that soft little video was the sound of him picking that pen up off the table. So now it is over to you, because this is that rare kind of story where two honest people can watch the exact same video and walk away from two completely opposite things. Tell me in the comments whether you believe Justin Baldoni is the victim he so calmly presents himself as, or whether the quietest man in the room is the one you should always be watching the very closest.